Good morning, and welcome to Honeycomb Highlights. Apparently this session is being streamed live everywhere, so I'd also like to say good morning to the galaxy. We will be doing the session in English. I'll apologize to everybody watching everywhere else. The only other option was miming it.
I can do it in French.
You could do it in French, and then you would only get his content, so let's not do that. So I am Chet Haase, and this is
Romain.
I don't like to pronounce his name on stage. We are on the UI Toolkit team on Android, obviously. We work on, what do we work on?
I don't know what you do. No, joke aside, Chet works on animation, and he's been helping me on Android 3.0 working on the new hardware accelerated rendering pipeline that we'll talk about a little later. And I've been on the team for 4 years. I've done many things, but lately I've been focusing on hardware acceleration.
And an important point that I'd rather not spend time on is the completely unparsable stuff at the bottom of the screen. If you get super bored with the session, you want to do something else, you can go on your devices and you can submit questions, which we'll try to get to at the end of the session at that first link. And you can give feedback on the session. We do appreciate that if you want to do that. Just pay attention to the session first and then give feedback later. That'd be awesome.
And only good feedback, please.
Yeah. If you want to say something bad about the session, just save it for the next session. That would be awesome. Hashtags, if you're doing the Twitter thing, IO 2011 and Android. And let's actually start the real content. So Honeycomb, as you probably know already, or at least heard in the keynote this morning, was all about tablets.
Well, and usually at this point, I like to ask the audience, how many of you have a tablet? But I just watched the keynote.
Everybody raise your hand.
Yes, please, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Sorry for the audience, watching on the web. No tablet for you. So Honeycomb, or Android 3.0, was, I believe, our biggest release since Android 1.0, at least given how many nights and weekends we spent on it, it felt like it. And it's very important to us because it was optimized for tablets. And the reason why it was optimized for tablets, well, are pretty obvious. A tablet is not a phone. We have a bigger screen. We have more pixels. We have more horsepower. We have a dual-core CPU on the first Android 3.0 tablet, the Motorola Zoom. The input is a little bit different because we have this larger screen. It's much easier to use the keyboard. And so that's why we focus very much on that form factor. And we're going to talk about all the improvements that we made for this release.
Actually, another important point, which we'll see later when we talk about the system bar, is the usage of a tablet is much different. The phone, you take it out, it's mostly in portrait mode. You rotate it occasionally to do something. But the tablet is meant to operate really completely in both orientations. In fact, all four. You want this thing to be fully rotatable and viewable from all directions. And that caused us to rethink the way that we were using buttons. So for instance, there's no hardware buttons on the original Zoom device that came out. And there's other ways of dealing with that input situation, which we'll see.
So we're first going to talk about the user improvements. So for those of you who are not familiar with the user interface of Android 3.0, we'll take you through some of the major new features as users. And then we'll talk more about some of the APIs that you can use in your applications to make them even more awesome. So here's the list of the major improvements that we've done in the user interface. The first one you will notice when you start using an Android 3.0 tablet is the new theme. So now we have a theme called Holo. We have this holographic theme throughout the application. And it's more visible on the launcher, on the home screen of the tablet, where you'll see this beautiful glowy wireframe when you scroll through the home screen. And I won't describe you the UI too much. We'll just show you in a few minutes. The keyboard is also much better. We talked about the screen size. I've always had trouble using a keyboard, on a touch keyboard on the phone, and on the tablet I can finally type emails without making too many mistakes. It's also pretty awesome. We support many languages in a much better way. So I often switch between French and English. It's even easier to do that on Android 3.0. We've also improved on text selection. And we'll give you a quick demo of that as well. So now if you want to do very fine-grained text selection, you want to select just a few characters or just a particular word, and you want to copy and paste that, it got a lot better. We have USB device connectivity. In Android 3.0, we support keyboards. And you've seen the announcement this morning. We'll talk about that later. But in Android 3.1, we support even more USB devices. Two new great widgets for the UI that you can use in your applications, the action bar and the system bar, and we'll talk about them in details. And finally, Android has always been really good at multitasking. We've always given the users the ability to switch between recently launched applications, and we made that even better on Android 3.0. There's a visual task switcher that shows you like little screenshots of the most recent applications you've been using, and it's great because it works like if you launch a game, if you launch a rich media application, it also works perfectly.
There's also a lot of improvements to applications, and there's some new applications as well. New applications include the Books application, which is very cool. We'll see that in a demo in a minute. Very nice, graphical effects, and really a lot of focus on making it look and feel like a real book as you're reading it. The reading experience is excellent. Also Movie Studio for doing some simple movie editing directly on the device. And then there's tons of improvements to existing applications that we ship with the device. In particular, all of these applications were really rethought, the entire UI and the way that they worked and interacted with the user, using this new form factor of the tablet. The much larger screen allows things like being able to see your message list at the same time as the content, a little bit more like an experience you might have on the desktop, for instance, for email. But all of these applications had major reworking. Market, which is released in parallel, it's not really bundled with the 3.0 release, but a lot of the improvements that were made for the tablet release were really pretty awesome. The Contacts app, the music, we'll see these all in a demo in a minute.
And on the slide, we made the distinction between new applications and improved applications. But the improved applications on the tablet, we did not just stretch the UI of our phone application. So like Chet said, we rethought the UIs completely. And if you use those applications, they will feel completely new to you if you were used to the Android phones. I know that, for instance, Gmail is now my favorite email client, across all the devices I have at home, like be it, my native client on my desktop or even the Gmail web UI. The Gmail application on the tablet is my new favorite email client. We also have new widgets, and here we're talking about widgets for the home screen. And actually, I see that we have some of the people who wrote those new widgets here in the room. So if you use the tablet and you like those widgets, you can go congratulate those guys. They did a tremendous work on them. The idea behind the new widgets is to have more interactive and richer widgets. So we finally introduced scrolling list grids for widgets. So for instance, if you want to look at your emails, you can have a Gmail widget on your home screen, and you can look at your inbox. You can scroll through your inbox. You can also use the bookmark widget. The bookmark widget gives you this really cool grid of bookmarks. You see little thumbnails of all your favorite bookmarks. And it even supports folders. So if, like me, you're crazy and you organize all your bookmarks in nested folders, you can have all that on your home screen, really easy to access. And of course, all the default widgets that we have and that you see in our standard applications, they use APIs that you can use in your application. So you can create your own amazing widgets.
So why don't we actually show some of these things in action? Sure. Run off the device here, and it should show up on one of these screens. There we go. So this is the home screen, which you may have seen in the keynotes, or maybe at home on your own device. So there was a lot of work on just the home screen UI itself. We now have these 5 virtual screens that you go between. All this nice sort of graphics interactivity here. You can go to the All Apps screen, scroll between all your apps. I only have one screen active right now. You can go to the widget selector and scroll through all of these lovely widgets here. We can pick one of these. Let's say we want this widget. We can drag and drop this to one of the screens. So we can go to that screen and check it out. And now you can see the interactive widget stuff that Romain was talking about live in display on the screen there. So we've got the Books app that we were talking about before. So you can go into the book and turn pages with this lovely page turning technology. I love that. As a graphics person, I would rather do this than actually read the book. Just all day.
This is an example of a new API that we introduced in Android 3.0 called RenderScript, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. And you'll see this new kind of 3D effects throughout the standard applications. So the book selector, for instance, uses RenderScript as well to have this beautiful 3D carousel. We use the same technology in YouTube to select music on the music wall. So here's another example of RenderScript. Here we go. The network is working. And all that you can use in your applications as well. It's all public APIs. The browser is one of the really cool new applications, well, improved applications on Honeycomb because we have tabs now. So you can have multiple tabs on screen. You can switch back and forth between your favorite websites without having to go to the menu, open the Windows UI, select the window. It's right there, always available. So this gives you a quick idea of what the Honeycomb UI looks like. And you can notice that everything is really smooth. We have tons of animation thanks to the use of the GPU in Android 3.0. And can we switch back to the slides, please?
We're good. So on to developer improvements, which is probably even more interesting to this particular crowd. How can we actually use the new capabilities of the device and the platform in 3.0 and 3.1? So first of all, there's fragments, which is a wonderful word, for fixing a specific problem on the platform as we move into other device spaces like the tablet. The original model of activities and going between screens actually going to new activities, it sort of breaks down when you go to a screen size that really supports much more going on in the screen. So for instance, the Gmail application or email application before 3.0, you would see part of the application at any given time. You're going to see your message header list. You're going to see the message content. You're going to see specific screens of the application one at a time because that's really all you can deal with on that little screen on the phone. Well, if you've got a tablet device, you can show much more on the screen. So now instead of having separate activities, you've got this one bundled activity. You've got a layout that can have more than one, maybe all screens of your application visible at any given time. Well, that's great, but if you have to rewrite your entire application to target these different devices, life quickly becomes painful. What we wanted was a way for people to be able to write reusable code so that you could write these chunks that could be used either in separate activities on smaller devices or in particular orientations where they make sense, or together in one activity, just side by side or on top of one another as fragments in a single activity in larger devices like a tablet in landscape mode, for instance. So you can think of them as mini activities, but basically the idea is you can have separate unique fragments running inside of one activity and then interacting together. At the same time, you can also take these same reusable chunks and use them inside separate activities in different device configurations. So for instance, I was talking specifically about going between phones and tablets, but you can also think of this as going between a portrait view and a landscape view on a phone. So let's see some graphics to sort of visualize what we're talking about here. So here's a phone and a tablet. There is a phone and a tablet where you can visualize this. On the left, you see a phone in portrait mode. You can probably only have like the message list in Gmail, for instance. Whereas on the tablet, you can support that and maybe even a longer list because the screen is so very large. In addition to the content of any particular message over on the right in that lovely green color for number 2. Or you can think of this as being sort of landscape versus portrait. So for example, you see a phone here in landscape mode where maybe you can have a header list on the left as well as a content thing on the right. Now, in this particular one, there's one single activity, which is showing a single layout that contains 2 fragments. Right? So they're written as these reusable chunks. They're bundled into one activity, and they're sitting inside one horizontal linear layout. On the next screen, we see the same exact fragments, the same reusable code used in a very different situation. There's one activity running at any particular time. When you click on one of the header items in the image on the left, then you go to the content in the image on the right, which is running inside a separate activity. Yes, separate activities, but it's totally reusable code. That's the entire point of fragments, is the ability to write the logic of your application once and then reuse it in these different device configurations. The screenshots that I was showing for these examples come from an excellent article that's an introduction to fragments by Diane Hackborn, who, not coincidentally, is the person who wrote most of the stuff. So you should check out her article on fragments on the Android developer blog. And you should also be aware that you can get this stuff in Android all the way back to 1.6. So since 3.0 and 3.1 are tablet releases, well, you sort of miss the point of being able to take fragments and apply that across device spaces if there's only that single device space for 3.0. The whole point was to be able to target different device spaces. So what we've done is ported back to Android releases as far back as 1.6 so that you can take that same stuff in a reusable library and actually use fragments in older applications and now be able to target your phone applications as well as your tablet applications.
So the system bar is that you haven't seen in the demo because there's this weird little thing that happens when you plug a tablet onto an HDMI device. We don't show the system bar on the remote screen. So we'll use screenshots instead. But believe me, it's really cool when you use it on an actual device. So Chet mentioned before that on tablets, you want to be able to use the tablet in any orientation you want. And as a result, on one of the first Android 3.0 tablets, there is no hardware button. So to work around that, we now have all the buttons that you're familiar with, the back button, the home button. They're on screen, they're software button, and they're in the system bar. So the system bar is always there, it's always available, and it's always at the bottom of the screen, so you always know that you can go back or go home by tapping in the bottom left corner of the device, no matter what orientation you are currently using. There's also a third button, the third one here, that's the new task switcher button. So before, on Android phones, if you wanted to switch between recent applications, you had to long press on the home button. And long press is new. It's useful, but it's not the most easily accessible feature that we had. So now it's just with one tap, you can see the list of applications that you've recently launched. And you can see here what I was mentioning before. We have little thumbnails that show you the state of the application just as you left it the last time that you used it. It's really great because instead of having to look at the icons, you can still look at the icons. They're still shown on screen. But you can more easily recognize what application you want to go to by just taking a quick glance at those little screenshots. And on the right, if you tap the right-hand side of the system bar, we have the clock, we have the various notifications, like what network coverage do you have. That's also where you get your notifications like email and Twitter messages and whatnot. If you tap that area, you get access to an expanded version of the notification tray. You will see more information about your current Wi-Fi connection. You can see the current battery level, but you get also more details for your notifications. And what's interesting is that those notifications are much richer than they used to be. You can also dismiss them individually. And they're so rich that you can actually make them interactive. So this is an example of an ongoing notification. So if you're playing music on your tablet, this is like streaming from the cloud, for instance, this is the notification you'll get. And without going to the music application, you can play, you can pause, you can go to the previous song, or you can go to the next song. And of course, these are public APIs, so your applications can do exactly the same thing.
So in the notification class is an internal class called Builder, and you can build these rich notifications very easily there.
And I mentioned that the system bar is always on screen because you always need to be able to back out of an application for whatever reason. And that might be an issue if you're trying to watch a movie or play a game. You don't want to be distracted by all those notifications at the bottom. You don't want to see those glowy buttons, and you don't want them to attract your attention. So now we have a mode called Lights Out that lets the application dim the content of the system bar. So when the system bar content is dimmed, you won't be interrupted by new notifications, and the buttons will be replaced by those tiny little subtle dots. So you can still access those buttons. You can still tap on them to go back. You can still go back to the home screen, but they won't attract your attention while you're focusing on the movie you're watching, for instance.
Or for instance, the book. So as I was using the book reader before, the system bar went into lights out mode, which you couldn't see because you can't see the system bar because of HDMI output. But it dims down to a point where I actually brighten this just so you could see there were dots there on the screen. But they're actually quite dark, and you can't really see them unless you're looking for them, which is kind of the experience that you want. If you're watching immersive content or reading a book, you don't really want to be looking at the home and back buttons all the time. So they dim out to a point where you can focus on the content instead.
Action bar. The action bar is also one of our awesome new features. And if you use the Google I/O schedule application last year, you have experienced one of our prototypes of what became the action bar in Android 3.0. So the action bar is the new title bar. This is what we use in every standard Android application. And it contains a lot of things. It's your new home within an application. So we'll start from the left, and on the left side of the action bar, you can see the icon of the current application that you're using. The icon can also serve as a navigation tool. We have a back button, but the back button never solved the issue of going home, but going home within an application. For instance, if I'm in Gmail and I open a label, then I open an email, to go back to the list of labels or to go back to the list of email, I had to press back a couple of times. Now with the action bar, we have this notion of home within the application, so you can just tap that icon and it will navigate back to the beginning of the app. We also have advanced navigation. So for instance, here in Gmail, if you have multiple accounts, you can switch between those accounts with this little drop-down menu. And as a developer, you have control over what kind of navigation you want. So instead of a drop-down, you can use tabs if you want. You can also put your own custom views inside. And the right-hand side is really interesting because now we don't have a menu button anymore. But we still need those. We still need the user to be able to access those actions that used to live in the menu on the phones. So now instead they go in the action bar on the right side, and that's what we call the actions. So they're always on screen, which is great. You don't have to open the menu to discover that you can do something in the application. And as a developer, you can decide what goes there. And you can notice that on the last icon to the right is this little menu icon. This is what we call the overflow menu. And when you click on it, you get access to even more actions. So now we can have actions that are always on screen, and we can also have more actions that are still useful, but that you don't necessarily want the user to be able to access all the time. And settings and help are great examples of that. It doesn't make sense to keep them on screen all the time. The action bar is also really useful because it can turn into a contextual action bar. And you can see the difference between the regular action bar and the contextual action bar because the contextual action bar turns green, and you can dismiss it on the left side with this done button. So for instance, in Gmail, when you select multiple emails, the contextual action bar shows up, and you can take action on those multiple emails. So you can archive them, you can delete them, you can store them. If you select text, you will get a contextual action bar to let you cut, copy, and paste. And actually, could we switch to the tablet, please? I would like to show you that real quick. So if I go to Gmail, and I select multiple emails, you can see the contextual action bar appear, and I can archive them and take action on those multiple emails at once. If I open an email, and I want to select something, here we go. The contextual action bar now gives me access to the actions that are related to text selection. So this is a great way for you in your apps to hide features, but still make them really accessible and really discoverable to the user. Can we switch back to the slides, please? Can we have the slides back, please? There we go. And the action bar is really easy to use. If you're wondering how you can put those actions in the action bar, it's extremely simple. This is the kind of code you would write for a phone before Android 3.0 to create a menu from an XML file. And that's the same code you write to put actions in the action bar. That's it. You have nothing else to do. So your existing code will work and put actions in the action bar. If you target the API level 11, so Android 3.0, you will automatically get the action bar. You will automatically get your actions in the action bar instead of a menu.
So you can think of the action bar as a replacement for the old menu, where we used to put things on the menu because there simply wasn't screen real estate for that. We now have this action bar with much more enhanced functionality, as well as the standard sort of menu option functionality that you used to use.
And of course, we've augmented the APIs a little bit. So this is the XML file that you would use on the phone to create the menu. And you will notice two new attributes, well, actually one new attribute used twice.
That's the only audio in the entire presentation.
And because we work for Google, we have an awesome budget, so that was Chet recording himself on the mic.
I had to practice for weeks.
So this new attribute, show as action, lets you control where you want the actions to show up in the action bar. So if you say always, this action will always be available in the action bar. It will be one of those icons that you've seen. If you say if room, that icon can be moved to the overflow menu depending on the configuration of the device. So if you rotate from landscape to portrait, and in portrait there's not enough room to display all the actions, you can tell the system what actions you want to put in the overflow menu. And I believe there's a third value that we didn't show here where you can say that you want something always in the overflow menu.
Render scripts. So you've already seen render scripts in action. We have been using it internally, prototype early versions of render script for the live wallpapers. Is there anything else, or mainly live wallpapers?
No, render script was used only for live wallpapers in Android 2.0 and 2.1, I believe.
But now it is a public API as of 3.0. So you can use it in your own applications, and we're using it in other applications, such as the Books application that we saw, the YouTube, the video carousel uses it. Other applications? Are those the main two that we ship with? So you can think of it as a way to get hardware acceleration, fast, good performance for computation as well as graphics. So it has graphics API, it has computation API, and it has a native C-like language that you use. It's platform independent, and it sort of cleverly compiles into an intermediate mode. So it compiles into some bit code that it understands, and then at runtime it compiles into the machine code that it needs to then run. The syntax is very C-like. It's based on C99. And it uses both the GPU and the CPU. And even more, it uses multi-core if it's there. So if you've written your code and structured it in a way that operations, let's say in a for loop, are independent and are operating on, say, separate pixels or separate values that have no interdependency, and if there's multi-cores on the device, then it will know, oh, I can execute this part of the for loop here, this other part over there, and you'll get better performance for your application automatically and seamlessly at runtime.
So yes, we used render script pretty much only for visual effects and 3D rendering in Android 3.0, but you do not have to use it for rendering. You can use it only for pure computation. So if you're doing image processing or audio processing or whatnot, you can use render script for that. You don't have to use the NDK. Your code will be platform independent because we can recompile the code on the device. We can optimize the code very efficiently for that particular architecture of device you have, and you don't have to worry about compatibility between various versions of ARM architectures, for instance. And we hope to use it more and more to make Android applications faster and better.
So the code that we're about to see, we're going to walk through a simple example of using render scripts. And this is a Hello World graphical application. But there's another application. This is actually in the SDK that ships. There's another application called Hello Compute. So you can check that out and see how you might use render script purely for computation. It does a simple image processing operation.
And I want to emphasize that this is a very simple example because we could spend a couple of days talking only about render script. You would probably be bored to death. So we won't do that. But we have examples in the SDK that you'll be able to look at if you're interested in it.
Also, I think since this is a conference, we have to do demo applications that use the phrase hello world in them. It's some sort of, it's like a union thing. We're supposed to do this. So hello world rs.java. This is the Java side of a render script application. So one of the very cool things about render script is when you write your render script code, you put variables in there that are going to be automatically reflected up to the upper layer that you access through the SDK code. So for instance, you have these public variables in render script, and it produces class files that you can then access from other code that you write at that SDK level. So here at the SDK level, we have hello world rs.java. It's going to initialize a script here that we see. It's going to, and it's a init function, it's going to create that script and bind the script together. This is sort of canonical operations you need to do at the beginning of your application to get ready to actually call into the render script code. And then it's going to receive input events, and its onActionDown function is going to be called with this X and Y value, which is where the finger is hit on the screen. And then it's going to set a value in the script. And again, this is where the magic glue comes in. It's going to call this setGTouchX and setGTouchY methods in this class. Well, this class was automatically generated by the render script compiler. You didn't have to create the boilerplate stuff there. It was created for you. So you automatically have access to the functions and variables that you need at the render script.
Yeah. So if any of you have ever used the NDK to write native code and then had to write JNI glue, you will appreciate that kind of things because there's nothing for you to do. You don't have to write that crazy, weird JNI code anymore.
Now, down at the render script level, this is a little more interesting because this is maybe a new language and syntax and APIs for you. You have the variables that automatically got reflected up, the gtouch x and y. You have an init function which automatically gets called by the render script's runtime when your script starts. So we're going to initialize the values of these variables to 50. And then you have the root function, which automatically gets called on every frame. So if this is a frame-based render script program, it's going to look for and call this root function every single time. And then you can do whatever it is you want to do in that function. In this case, we're going to clear this screen. Then we're going to set the color of the font that we're going to draw text with. And then we're going to call this API render script draw text. And we're going to draw that hello world text at wherever the finger touched on the screen. Amazingly complex application, I know. But it was simplified for the purposes of actually explaining this. And then finally, this completely inexplicable return of 20 at the end is the interframe delay that you want to be run with. So this is a very easy timing mechanism that you can use to set up animations. So you basically say, I want 20 milliseconds to elapse between the times that we call. So this is going to give you an effective frame rate of about 50 frames a second.
And a good example of where we use that, if you used an Android phone and you use one of the built-in live wallpapers, for instance, grass or water or galaxy, we use that return value to specify a very specific frame rate so that we don't chew on the CPU and the GPU too much. So we've designed the wallpapers, we've designed the animation so that they can run at a low frame rate and still look really good. So we don't run them at 60 FPS, we don't run them even at 30 FPS, I think we're around 20. And we control the frame rate thanks to that return value. And just one last thing on this slide, if you look at the functions we call, they have this prefix called RSG. This stands for render script graphics. So those functions are only available when you want to do rendering. If you want to do pure computation, don't use the RSG functions.
Jason Sams was one of the engineers behind RenderScript, and he's written 2 excellent introductory articles, also on the Android developer blog, so you should check those out. And also play with the samples that ship with the SDK. There's the Hello World that we looked at here, there's one for compute, and then there's 3 or 4 others in there that give you a good feel for how you write RenderScript applications in general. It's worth understanding that there are different ways to write applications, and they all have their sort of different niches. There is the RenderScript thing, which we made public in 3.0, which is for doing fast, native, platform-independent graphics and compute stuff. But in other situations, it's more appropriate to still use the SDK for your typical GUI applications or whatever. You can also write NDK code and use OpenGL directly. Or you can write SDK code and use bindings at the SDK level for writing OpenGL applications, OpenGL ES1, OpenGL ES2. All of these things are available, and all of them are possible for you to use. It just depends on what your application is and what it's trying to do, which one is most appropriate for you.
And one little trick, you might be tempted to look at the source code of the live wallpapers that we shipped since Android 2.0. Do not do that. There's a reason why we waited until Android 3.0 to release RenderScript as a public API, and that's because we changed the API a lot. Believe me, I started using RenderScript like in its first version, and it was a pain to use. So we took our time, we used it in production, and we ran into issues, we improved it, and what we have now, it's much easier to use. So the live wallpapers themselves are not great examples of how to use RenderScript today. They were meant for the old versions of RenderScript. So look at the SDK samples instead. So graphics acceleration, many people have been asking for it since pretty much we launched Android. Since Android 1.0 has supported OpenGL on the GPU. And I believe like pretty much every Android phone, except like a couple I know of, have shipped with hardware support for OpenGL. But here we're talking about OpenGL acceleration for the standard UI drawing operations. So when you use a canvas to draw on screen and you call draw line, draw bitmap, that's what's hardware accelerated now on Android 3.0. And we don't support everything. We'll have a talk about this, I believe, tomorrow morning. So if you want to know more details about it, come tomorrow morning. But to give you an idea, every single application that we ship with Android 3.0 uses the hardware acceleration. It is an opt-in. So it's not on by default. It's a very complex API to use. That's it. So if you want to opt in, just open your Android manifest, look for the application tag, and just add this single attribute. And we wish we could have made it automatic. The problem is we could not guarantee 100% compatibility with existing application. So if your application uses custom views or custom drawing, custom rendering code, you should test it before. And you will need to test it on the device because the emulator does not support the new hardware accelerated pipeline. But the standard UI toolkit, all the standard drawables, all the standard views from the Android.widget package support hardware acceleration completely and perfectly. And like I mentioned, all the standard applications, the web browser, Gmail, YouTube, all these applications use the hardware acceleration. So if your application doesn't do anything crazy, you'll be fine. Yeah, so if you want to know more about it, come tomorrow morning. I also wrote an article on the official Android blog that explains, all the limitations and caveats of this new hardware accelerated pipeline.
So something else that someone worked on in 3.0 was a new animation framework. We already had a lot of animation capabilities in Android. Obviously, there's stuff moving on the screen, right? So it has to be animated somehow.
Well, and frankly, the old animation system sucked.
I'm not allowed to say that since I didn't write it, but he is.
I didn't write it.
I wasn't here at the time. I had nothing to do with it.
I only maintained it. And that's why I can say that.
That's actually why I was hired, to maintain the old system. It's my penance.
Yeah, actually, it was pretty funny. When I joined Android, a few months after I joined Android, I opened this bug, and I filed it against me, saying, write new animation system. And then 3 years later, we hired Chet, and I gave him the bug. So sorry it took so long.
And I closed it 3 months ago. Yay. So the hard part about using the old animation system was that it did very specific things well. You could move a view, you could fade a view, you could rotate a view, and you could, and that was about it, actually.
Yeah.
And if you want to do anything else, like you want to change a background color, you want to animate the gradient colors, or you want to fade something that doesn't happen to be a view, or if you want to animate something that doesn't happen to be a view, you were really on your own.
Yeah, and actually there's a great example of that. If you want to make fun of us, actually fun of me in particular, you can go look at the source code of the progress bar widget, and you'll see how animations are handled in there. It's pretty ugly. It uses a fade animation to do something that's not a fade. But it works. So we write hacks as well.
So hopefully the new animation system in 3.0 won't be considered a hack. It's based on an idea called property animation, where you basically say, I want to animate this object. Here's the property in that object I want to animate, and here are the values that I want to animate between. And when I say property, what I'm referring to is a name. You pass in a string, and that refers to something that has a matching setter and possibly a getter on that class. So for instance, views now expose new properties like alpha, translation x, translation y, rotation, rotation x, rotation y, these things that are listed at the bottom of the screen. These things all have setters and getters associated with them. So if you want to move a view on the screen, if you want to move a button, you can say, I want to animate the x or translation x property, and that will automatically call into the setter for that object. So here's a little bit of code so you can see exactly what we're talking about. If you want to animate the alpha value, which is the new way to fade out or fade in an object using the new animation system, you say, I want to animate the alpha property, and it will call set alpha over time, and it'll animate to the value of 0 from whatever it happens to be right now.
And so this is the kind of code you would write now with the new animation system. So how many of you think it's easy to use? Just raise your hands. Don't be shy. OK, that's pretty good.
1, 2, OK, keep it. 3, 4.
So the other ones are either asleep, they don't understand what you're talking about, or they suck. Anyway, I disagree with you guys. So in 3.1, Chet made it even easier.
Oh, but wait, before we go on, this is actually, so I really like the new animation system because I'm a little biased. But even more than that, I like the fact that we now have an alpha property on views. You no longer have to access a transform that's part of an alpha animation that lives on I didn't even understand how alpha worked before. It is a property on a view. You can now make a view translucent. It's the way it should be. So let's go ahead and look at an application that Romain wrote to view photos. This is a demonstration of some of the new graphics acceleration as well as the new animation framework.
So it's a very simple demo that is available at code.google.com/p/xlarge-demos. Yes.
Go to his blog, and the link is there.
Yeah, you'll find it. So this is an example of both hardware acceleration and how to use animations properly. So it uses the new system to do this kind of new cool animations. We can reverse animations. We can run several animations at the same time. Can swipe to reveal more stuff. So a very simple example, but we kept it simple so that you could look at the code and very quickly and easily understand how to use the new animation system and hardware acceleration. Can we switch back to the slides, please? So this is the code that runs behind the scenes. So when I was moving that little panel back and forth on the left, it's a pretty simple piece of code. If the panel is already visible, we just animate the X property of the panel from the current value to 0 to move it to the side. And in the other case, we just animate by the opposite of the width of the panel itself. So we just use this object animator class to build one of those animator objects, and then we just call start on it, and that's all I have to do. So pretty easy. There's a bit more code that you will find in the demo, and we'll talk about it in more details tomorrow. But we use hardware layers, a new API in Android 3.0, to make the animations even faster when hardware acceleration is turned on. And one more piece. You saw that when I was tapping really quickly, the animation will revert, and it's really cool because it's all done for me by the animation system. So I don't have to compute, how much time has elapsed since the animation has started, like what should be the duration of the new animation, what should be the values. Instead, I just check at the top, if my animation is already running, I just have to go reverse on it, and that's it. You don't have anything else to do. Very easy, very simple.
So I wrote an article describing this stuff and more, lots of geeky details there. So check out the Android developer blog for an article about the new animation framework. And I also put a lot of micro demos showing different aspects of the animation framework in the SDK in 3.0. So check that out as well. And then there's much, much more. So there's a lot that we didn't show today, some because we didn't have time and some because we simply don't know how it works.
Or we don't understand it. Yeah, Chet is really baffled by this HTTP live streaming thing.
I've heard from sources that would know that it's very, very good, though. So you can take their word for it.
But yeah, we have really cool new APIs. So we have a much better clipboard API, drag and drop. We didn't show that to you, but if you are in the email or the Gmail application, you can long press on one or more emails, and you can drag them into a different folder or in a new label. This is now, it's always been possible, but you had to write a lot of custom code. Now it's an API. It's very easy to do. HTTP live streaming, whatever that is, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's very good.
The pluggable DRM framework, awesome. Encrypted storage, I'm sure a lot of people will be excited by that. We have new and improved components in the UI toolkit. Some of them have been requested for a long time by you guys. So now we have a real date picker, we have a real number picker, we have a calendar view, so you don't have to build your own, it's all done for you. And we have the brand new stack view. The stack view is a really cool new widget. You see a stack of items. And when you swipe the stack, you get a really cool 3D animation, and you can go through the stack. The stack view is used by some of the home screen widgets. If you use the YouTube widget, for instance, you will see this really cool new component. Tools have gotten much better, and there's a really awesome presentation tomorrow at 3 p.m. By Tor. He's sitting right here. They've been working really hard, and the UI builder is awesome. We have much better code completion and a lot more features that I'm sure they will show you tomorrow.
And it turns out there's also more. They mentioned some of this in the keynote this morning. There's new stuff in 3.1, which was released as of today. So in 3.1, some of the stuff that we have is USB beyond keyboard. So supporting some of the gaming and pointing devices. They showed some of that in the keynote this morning, as well as capabilities for doing much more as a developer with that. And so you should go to one of the talks on that. I think there's one this afternoon. We'll give you the time later. There's external camera support, so you know when devices are actually plugged in and unplugged from the system using standard camera APIs. Resizable widgets, so you can take a look at even more of the inbox that you don't want to deal with right now. There's real-time protocol API for VoIP and video conferencing. That should come in handy, but there's performance optimizations because, frankly, we're engineers. This is what we do. We love to make stuff go faster. This is one of the things we really focus on in the graphics and UI group. just working on core performance because that's one of the things that makes a better experience for the users. So we've done a lot, certainly in the framework area, to make stuff work faster and better. The home screen and the launcher have been doing stuff. We've also done stuff for GPU acceleration, and we will continue as we go. And then finally, View Property Animator, which I put in there just because it's mine. And that's
also awesome.
An even simpler way of animating the specific new properties that we added in 3.0. A very easy way of just saying, animate this to that, go. And in the future, so one of the questions that tends to come up when we talk about Honeycomb is, yeah, but when is it going to be on my other device? And the intention has always been to bring the features and the functionality of Honeycomb to smaller devices. We just had a lot of work to do the tablet release. We were a little busy at the time, and we continue to work on this problem. It'll get there. And then we'll make everything else better in the meantime.
So for more information, there are plenty of really awesome sessions. We did not list them all, but if you're interested in the new USB accessory support, there's a session this afternoon. There's the Fireside Chat. If you have questions in general about Android, there will be several members of the Android team there to answer your questions. There will be a great talk on how to design and implement Android UIs for both phones and tablets. Android development tools that we mentioned. And there will also be a great talk about memory management. Memory is scarce, even on tablets, so you have to be very careful of how you manage it inside your application. And Patrick will give you all the tips and tricks you need to know about.
This is just a sampling, obviously. There's a lot more Android talks and a lot of other awesome talks at Google I/O. I just picked the talks here that have something to do with what we covered in the talk today.
And don't forget our talk, too.
Oh.
Tomorrow.
Did I not put that one there?
Yeah, what's up with you?
What was I thinking? Go to the rendering talk tomorrow morning. I'll be looking for you.
You can also check out the Android developer blog. We post a lot of technical articles on there, and Chet's blog and my own blog from time to time when we have time, which doesn't happen very often these days. We try to give you insight and tips and tricks on Android. And now we have about 15 minutes for questions. If you have questions, please come to the front of the room. We have mics. If you don't ask your question in the mic, we won't answer the question because we won't be able to hear it. And we also have questions from people online, from all over the galaxy. So we'll start with a question from the room.
If you use intents for menu items, so the ones that have category alternative or category selected alternative, how do you do the if room part for the new action bar?
That is a great question, and I have no idea. There will be Android office hours all day long. Some of the engineers who worked on menus and action bars will be there, so you will have to ask your questions to those people. Sorry.
I have another question.
Sure.
How will the new action bar API look on phones? Is there any idea?
The action bar API itself will probably be the same. I don't know what it will look like visually, but
yeah, visually.
I don't know. I don't know yet. An online question: when to expect ice cream, gingerbread plus honeycomb combined into one code base? So Mike Claren this morning mentioned Q4 2011. So that is our current answer. Sir?
I was wondering what the differences for performance metrics are between the RenderScript bytecode compiler versus the Dalvik bytecode compiler, specifically the JIT, and why it was chosen as a separate bytecode form and language.
So I don't remember. We've done some comparisons. I don't remember the exact results. And the reason why they're different is because RenderScript, being a C99-based language, uses LLVM as its compiler.
Okay.
So it's just a different compiler.
So are you going to support LLVM in the NDK soon?
I don't know about the NDK, but Android 3.0 devices have bits of LLVM, on the device. So maybe. Online, could you provide following details on the storage encryption feature supported by Honeycomb? I have no idea what this is talking about.
So the answer would be no, we can't.
Yes, that's right, we can't.
Someone can, just
so
not.
There will be Android office hours. So for you people online, find a Google I/O ticket and come ask your question to our other engineers.
So when you run applications that were written for Android phones on tablets, they look pretty ugly because, there is a lot of screen real estate, but they put in landscape mode. So the thing kind of looks weird, whereas the same thing, I shouldn't mention iPad, right? But if you run an iPhone application on iPad, it's actually reasonably usable, but that isn't true for an Android phone app on a tablet.
So why is it not usable?
Because it goes into landscape mode and kind of shows on a very small part of the screen.
No, it doesn't. If your application is written correctly, the layout will just use the whole screen estate, and your list will be bigger, everything will just adapt. So,
no, as I said, right, these are old apps that weren't written with the tablet in mind at all.
No, I understand, but they will use the whole screen.
They were compiled for 1.6.
And then they did not do the right thing in their manifest.
Okay, so they should be compiled for?
No, you can compile for 1.6, but in your manifest you should say that you support large screens, and it's not just tablets, it's even phones with larger screens. That's why we have layouts in the UI toolkit. It's to adapt to any screen size. So if the app is not behaving correctly, that's the app's fault. Yeah, sometimes it's not our fault, it's also yours. Yeah, we have to share the guilt. Online, how to tweak app UI, which is built in, say, Android 2.3 so that it can work effectively in Android 3.0, i.e. Honeycomb. That's a great question that I barely understand. So if you wrote your application correctly, that's kind of related to the question we just had. The layout will automatically stretch nicely. If you want to tweak the UI to adapt to a larger screen, you can use the xlarge modification for resources directories. So you can use layout-xlarge, for instance, and you can put your tablet-specific layouts in there. This is what we've done for the standard Android applications. So the tablet is just another screen size, just like you had HDPI, LDPI, small screens, normal screens. Now we have xlarge screens.
There is a talk on that topic, I think it's this afternoon, on writing applications for phones and tablets. And if this question pertains to people who don't happen to be here at Google I/O, these talks are being recorded and will be available sometime soon.
I realize that the system bar and action bar are subtly different but similar to the hardware buttons that we expect on phones.
Okay.
When those come to phones, should we expect both to be on the screen as well as the hardware buttons? How should we expect to handle that?
I do not have an answer for you. I don't know. I believe that if your phone has hardware buttons, you probably won't get software buttons in the system bar, and if you don't have hardware buttons, then you will get software buttons. But I don't know the answer.
Okay.
We'll take a couple of online questions. Are there any speed improvements for the emulator? No. Jokes aside, we are aware that the emulator can be slow on some computers. And actually, even on our monster computers that we use at work, it's not the greatest. So we have people working hard on making things better for the emulator.
We have our best minds on the problem.
So that's a question I like.
Yes, I wanted to get to that.
Yeah, will Honeycomb provide a full GPU?
No, full GPU.
Yeah, full GPU acceleration in the near future. Well, it already does.
Yeah.
So.
That was a softball question. Are you just asking about stuff that you know we can say yes to?
So
yes.
Moreover, some performance are still not great. Using the launcher in Portrait is choppy. Will this change? No, we love slow applications. No, this is, I believe he's referring to a particular issue on specific hardware. When you change the orientation, at least in Android 3.0, the hardware could not deliver the same kind of performance in every orientation, and the 3.1, I believe, fixes this issue, but I'm not sure. But it's something we're aware of, and we have a fix in the works, or we have already delivered it, something like that.
And in the meantime, we continue to work on the acceleration
Yes.
of GPU performance all the time anyway.
Believe it or not, we want things to go fast.
All right, so I understand that dimming the status bar is a reasonable compromise for immersive apps. But I've tried to build a kiosk on the tablet, and I would love to get rid of the whole thing. If
Yes.
possible.
Well,
Do you have any black tape?
Yes, I actually did that. I did, but it clearly doesn't look as nice as a tablet.
Can you
embedded.
draw the icons on the black tape? Then it would look better.
That's true. Yeah.
no, there's no API to hide the status bar because I don't believe that's a use case we support, like the kiosk mode. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk to some of our engineers involved with the system bar, they will be available during the Android office hours.
Okay, thank you.
Online, is the Chrome browser in Honeycomb a full Chrome browser? No, because it is not the Chrome browser. It is the Android browser. Does that mean Honeycomb is suitable for laptops? Well, there's this awesome, I think it's Asus? Yeah, the EEE transformer. You can just add a keyboard to your tablet and it becomes a laptop. It's awesome. It's great. So yes, I believe that it works great on laptops. Easy question.
You mentioned the compatibility library for fragments. Is the action bar and render script backwards compatible?
Action bar is not part of that library, and render script is not either. One of the issues with render script is that it requires some stuff in the framework like LLVM, so we can't really backport it.
The reason there was the extra effort for Fragment was because this is exactly the use case it was trying to address. And if it's only going to work on tablets for now till we get out the releases that support other devices, then it becomes a bit of a moot issue. The sooner we could bring it to other device spaces, the better it's going to be for the Android developers in general. The other ones, I think, forward-looking from 3.0 onward is more appropriate. We don't want to spend all our efforts backporting all the stuff that we're doing when really we're focusing on making stuff better and better for the future, and we've got limited people to begin with.
Are there any UI guidelines document website for Android Honeycomb? Please watch the Android UI for phone and tablet session. I think it's tomorrow by Romain and Adam Powell. They might be able to answer that question for you, or they will give you the answer. Since the browser is based on Chrome, when will we be able to add extensions? It is not based on Chrome.
All right, is there going to be any more documentation for render script? Right now, trying to decide whether we're going to go with the render script route or OpenGL or NDK. Right now, there's no real good demos for...
There's 2 awesome articles.
Besides those 2 awesome articles.
I can predict that in the future, there might be perhaps, this is not a promise, more documentation. We certainly would love to have more documentation, more examples. I'm sure this will come, but I can't give you any ETA or make any promise. But yes.
I think the SDK demos are probably the thing to go to now until we have something more.
And when the Honeycomb source code is available, you will be able to look at how we've done it inside our own apps. Yes?
Which are the main modules involved in a render script rendering path, and does it use OpenGL?
So render script currently uses OpenGL, yes. Okay. It doesn't have to, it's kind of an abstraction, and OpenGL is an implementation detail for now.
Okay. From a graphics integration perspective, what are the key challenges that can come up when we integrate render script on a new platform?
I don't get the question.
Assume that we are integrating Honeycomb on a new hardware platform, right? As long as it supports OpenGL, will there new issue? Can there be graphics performance issues that can come up?
No, I mean if you support OpenGL ES2, the current version of RenderScript should run just fine.
I think the main thing I've seen in my entire life is whenever you go to a new platform supporting OpenGL, does that driver work exactly the same as other drivers on other platforms? You always have to test and make sure that all the corner cases are going to work appropriately. So yeah, I mean it supports standards OpenGL ES2. Whether your device and your driver supports that same level, that's what testing and qualification is for.
Go ahead.
I have a couple questions. First, you mentioned encrypted storage. Does it mean that the share preferences can now be saved as encrypted?
I have no idea.
As opposed to keychains? Yeah, no
idea. No clue whatsoever.
Second question. You mentioned 3.1, the fact there's RTP being introduced, but 2.3 introduced RTP libraries already. So how are the differences?
I have no idea.
That was a bullet point, and I knew the high-level point. No, you should go to the office hours and find the other folks here that are going to know more about those.
Okay, and last quick one. We do a lot of video encoding and transcoding on the phone, and currently a lot of work is done in NDK, in software. And we know that the H.264 encoder is available on hardware, available on the phones. Are there any plans to open up that API to
Android office hours?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, find a video engineer. They're going to be able to help you much more.
Okay.
And I think
one
more?
We have time for
one more from the mic, and this is it.
And then you're free.
Okay, I have one question. Is it possible, or will it be possible, to run any third-party application like Angry Bird within a widget or fragment in your application?
Can you run Angry Bird as a fragment inside your application? If somehow they gave you a library that provided you with an Angry Bird fragment, which would be weird, yes.
Or if there's an Angry Bird intent, which just sounds odd. A service of Angry Birds on your phone.
You know, fragments are awesome, but you know, they're not magical. They're just, you know, they're basically a bunch of views. So it depends on what you're provided with. And that's it for today.
That's it.
Have a great day.
Thanks.